Last week we finished off Boaz and Ruth sort of interacting, and we were thinking about the end of chapter 1, and we said, hey, we've now been introduced to Boaz as the potential solution to the chapter 1 problem of Naomi being, and Ruth, but Naomi being empty. That was the center idea of chapter 1, that she had no hope and no future because she had no sons and no possibility of having any more sons. So we saw too that Ruth is fabulous. We're going to see that again here in our text today, Ruth being just amazing. Boaz, somebody needs to get me a fan because Boaz is just on fire with these verses. It's gonna be a great time of me just saying, oh my gosh, and then Boaz. Oh, and Boaz. Boaz is great.
The first son's gonna
So,
be Boaz.
maybe.
But he was much older.
Yes. But that makes it really cool. And we're gonna take a closer look into it as we go through. But again, we saw in those previous verses, God manipulating circumstances and sort of pulling threads along in coordination with people's free will. Again, it's a really cool thing how God works in tandem with our choices to bring Boaz and Ruth to this opportunity, and they're meeting and they're having this conversation in the barley fields, and we're going to see even further God moving. Just to show again where we are, we started off, we're in this whole section in the middle of chapter 2 where we have these interactions in the field. We started off with Boaz talking to his workers. We split that into sort of two groupings. The first group, just sort of the workers in general, and then that one servant, the foreman of the field. Now we're in the sort of middle section where Boaz and Ruth are talking. And we stopped last week where Boaz has gone to Ruth and said, hey, my daughter, don't be afraid. I've got you. You can work with my women, drink the water. It'll be okay. Don't go anywhere else. You're safe here. And now we're going to take a look at what Ruth responds. How does she respond to Boaz saying, hey, you're going to be okay? So, again, if you have your Bibles, you can open them, or you can follow along on the screen. It is going to be slightly difficult to follow along on the screen because, I do stuff like this, because who can read this color?
Good job.
Wow, she gets a sticker. Well done. I need stickers. I don't need stickers. Take it back. I've got enough energy pulsing through. I'm like, I don't need stickers to hand out. So let's go ahead and read verse 10. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? So there's a lot going on. Again, remember, Ruth is a short book, but the author packs it in. So everything is super significant here. Take a look at the first paired phrasing here. She fell on her face, bowing to the ground. I don't know about you guys, but I personally have never fallen flat on my face. Well, for non-sport related reasons. So for sports, but here we see she's clearly, at least if nothing else, overwhelmed. She's been overcome with emotion, and she's just bam on the ground. Now, there's some discussion with commentators. Was this worship? Was this actually an act of worship? Because we see in other places in Scripture and in other cultural avenues that falling prostrate on the ground is an act that is often paired with worship. Based on what everything else that Ruth says, and based on Boaz's response to Ruth, and on how Ruth interacts with the Lord and how just all of the different interactions, I don't see anything lending support to that particular view, that she was actually trying to worship Boaz. Other commentators say, hey, this was an act of respect. This was an act that said, hey, thank you so much. This is gratitude. This would have been appropriate for the Oriental culture. And that makes sense to me, that this was just her saying, hey, oh my gosh, submitting, respect, and elevating Boaz because she's so overwhelmed by his generosity. And to me, that makes sense. If you come to a slightly different spot, we're not going to kick you out of the group, but that's sort of where I tended to lean as I was doing research and just sort of looking at the passage. Any questions on
Maybe she's
those?
overwhelmed.
Yes.
Overwhelmed with his generosity.
Yes, definitely. And I think that we can't walk away from those verses without saying that. Definitely. Good. So now let's continue forward here. I really find it interesting that she asks, "Why have I found favor in your eyes?" Whenever just a few verses prior, she specifically said to Naomi, "Hey, I'm going to go and I'm going to try to find somebody in whose eyes I find favor." Mm-hmm. And you're like, "Whoa, Ruth, like God heard the unspoken prayer of your heart. He answered. Here, Boaz is showing you favor." And I just thought that was really like how I can respond to God sometimes, where I'm praying and I'm praying and I'm praying, and then God's like, "Okay, here," and I'm like, "I'm sorry, is that for me? I don't think that's for me. No, it can't possibly be for me. No, it's not for me." So, yes, Miss Lisa.
Do you think that she's a new believer?
Yes.
So she's not looking for things like
Yes.
that. Like, she doesn't understand that this is the way God works.
Yeah.
So she wouldn't really be looking for that, I don't think.
Yeah, and she doesn't have a whole lot working in her favor as she understands it. As she points out, she's a foreigner, and she's living in a foreign land. And so she's anticipating hostility. She's hoping to find some favor, but she knows that she's not set up for success in and of herself, based on just who she is, what her racial identity is.
She just
so
thought favor meant that they would allow her to clean in that field.
yeah, and certainly I think that whenever she was originally asking, "Hey, I want to find favor," again, she's really hoping not to get beat up and to be allowed to at least get something for herself and Naomi. And I don't think that the text doesn't really give us a lot of insight, but I don't think that Ruth's thoughts went much beyond that. But, so let's continue forward here. She says, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" And let's dive into these two phrases right here. In English, "take notice of" and "foreigner" are two completely separate words. They have nothing to do with each other whatsoever. However, in Hebrew, these two words come from the same root. You're like, how? Well, it's really interesting. So foreigner basically boils down to unknown, somebody who's unknown. And take notice of is sort of a slightly variant of that, is to investigate the thing that is unknown, or to look into, to draw near to the thing that is unknown, to make it known. And so it's just a really cool play on these words here that Ruth is saying, "Hey, why are you looking into the unknown? Why are you, what? Interesting, too, the word foreigner. So thinking about Ruth as, obviously, she is a Moabite. She is a foreigner, right? But why does she identify herself like this? Well, obviously, again, she's got this in her mind. That's her primary worry, besides being a woman, is that she's a Moabite in Israel. She's got all of these insecurities floating around here.
She looks different.
She could have looked different. We're not completely sure. I tried so hard to find, and I could not find anything saying one way or the other. But two, think about this. She's in conversation with Boaz. She doesn't know that Boaz knows anything about her. She has no idea. All that she knows is that this dude, who happens to be the owner of the field, has all of a sudden approached her. And he's having this conversation with her, and she's like, "Whoa, what's happening? Why are you talking to me?" I'm like, "I'm not from around here. Just leave me alone and let me glean." Not quite like that, but that's sort of the general gist. Is that, all she knows that he knows, all she thinks that he knows, is that she's not from here. We know that Boaz knows more. No.
And there also could have been a lot of fear when he approached her.
Oh, I'm sure.
He's
I'm
not
sure.
going to want me in this field, and so then to find its complete opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Cool.
Absolutely. Definitely. Well, let's slide forward here. Moving on to verses 11 and 12. It looks complicated. We'll break it down. I promise. Let's go ahead and read the whole thing. But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law, since the death of your husband, has been fully told to me. and how you left your father and mother and your native land, and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So now we're going to take a closer look into really why is Boaz treating her the way that he is? And we go right to the crux of the matter. He's thinking about what Ruth's done for Naomi. And we're like, well, duh. Well, duh. But again, from Ruth, like, she doesn't know. What's going on? Why are you treating me like this? So this is his response. All that you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. Now, before we dive into all of this, I just want to think about this phrase here, has been fully told to me. Now, whenever I saw that, I was kind of curious. I'm like, well, I don't know if I missed it here, but Scripture didn't exactly relate to that whole story right there in the preceding verses, so I feel like I missed something. And it's possible that, the author just didn't include that portion of the conversation with the foreman. He was like, meh, they don't need to hear that twice. We're just going to cut it down, and we're just going to press forward. So I feel like that's a possibility, that there was just more to the conversation that we didn't see. It's also possible that there was all this buzz and the talk in the town, and people are chatting, and the women are going, have you heard about Ruth and Naomi? And so Boaz has heard the chatter of the town. I think that that's possible, too. I was going to say, I lean toward the second option, but...
Because when the foreman says, she is the young woman from Moab, it's almost like you already know, you've heard about this young woman that came out with Moab, with Naomi.
That's a very good point. Yep. And so Boaz has, one way or the other, found out the whole thing, the whole shebang, and now he's like, you're Ruth. Oh, you are Ruth. Very cool. So he's put all the pieces together, and he says, now I understand. I've put the dots together. You're the one. So thinking about the previous slide, real quick, thinking about how Ruth is a foreigner. I'm sure a lot of you have picked up on this already, but if you notice in Boaz's immediate family history, his family tree, we have a really, really interesting character. Does anybody know a very interesting female character listed directly above Boaz in his family tree, just off the top of your head? It's Rahab the prostitute. Yes, yeah. Who was not an Israelite. She was, in fact, a foreigner. Yeah. And, we got the great story of Jericho. They marched around the walls, and, all the walls came down, but not Rahab's portion of the wall. And so we have, again, this really interesting connection. We're not completely sure if it was his mother or, again, grandmother or some close relation, because there are generations missing in that genealogy. But Boaz had to know that somewhere in his family tree was this Rahab character, and he probably interacted with her. He probably got to see God's transforming work in her and understood that whole idea of love the foreigner, because, whenever a person comes into God's family, God accepts them as his own, regardless of where they started as, whatever nation or tribe they're from. And so Boaz has this as his backstory as well, which definitely could have inclined his heart even more kindly toward Ruth. But again, that's not all that's at stake here. The real issue is about Naomi and about what Ruth has done for her. So remember that Boaz is related to Naomi.
It's pretty distant, isn't it?
It was a cousin or something like that. Something like that is there are different theories based on the words that are used as to how close exactly they related. Some people, again, some things say, hey, it was Elimelech's nephew.
Oh, they were from the clan. They were from that clan.
They were at least related in some way, is what we see. And so it's interesting to think about, why didn't Boaz reach out to Naomi before this? It's possible that the parting when Elimelech and Naomi left was really bitter. And so maybe there were some walls that were erected that would have been hard to break down. It's possible, too, that Naomi's big speech in the crowds whenever she came back to the city of Bethlehem, he was like, okay, Naomi's back and she doesn't want anybody near her. Cool. Keep him a distance. It could have been that he just didn't know exactly how to help her. He was like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what I can do. We don't know. But we do know that the kindness that Ruth showed to Naomi would be a kindness done to Boaz himself, because there's that deep family connection. And again, in this culture, you can almost think about it like if somebody does something really nice for one of your kids, like something like really, really great, and you're just like, that person is amazing. Oh my gosh, you're the best. I just love you. Bless you. Bless your soul. Bless your heart. Bless your heart. And so there's some things sort of similar could be going on here, where Boaz is just, wow, Ruth, you've done kindness to Naomi, and that in turn is a kindness to me. But let's take a closer look at exactly what Ruth has done. We know it's for Naomi, but what has Ruth done that Boaz is seeing that for him is significant? Remember, in this culture, the death of your husband is devastating. In our culture, it's terrible, but we can survive. Many of us. We can, get a job. We can get on, government support. We've got, church body to come around us. We've got some family and friends. We can make it. We're not, destitute, forlorn, hopeless. This culture, oh no, you are all of those things. You don't got anything. Boaz knows this. Ruth knows this. They all know it. So he's saying, hey, since your husband died, you've lost your security, you lost your hope, you lost your future. Really, culturally speaking, Ruth should have followed Orpah. Ruth should have gone back to her father and her mother and her native land. She would have had security. She would have had food. She would have had that protection. And she would have eventually gotten some other marriage set up and then had a future. And Boaz recognizes, you left it all. You gave up everything. You gave up everything for Naomi. You came to a land you didn't even know. You don't know any of these y'all. You know the one Israelite. You don't know any of the rest of them. You left your security to a place of total insecurity. And he is super, super impressed. And so he segues right into a prayer of blessing for her. Let's read that again. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So let's explore this again a little bit deeper. The word repay shares a root with the word shalom, which many of you know is a Hebrew word for peace. It's not just peace being like a quietness, but it really has a sense of wholeness, that everything is right. One commentator that I read said that the Lord maintains order or wholeness by repaying people in accordance with their deeds. So Boaz is asking that Ruth be restored to that wholeness, to that peace, based on what she has done, which in and of itself is cool. Like that's a cool thing for Boaz to be praying for Ruth. But then let's take a look at the second phrase here. A full reward is basically, may your wages be paid in full. So he's saying, again, may this be paid back to you. It's as if, this is almost like a work arrangement, but because he's understanding that the Lord does reward those who do rightly. And he says, be given you by Yahweh, that's God's covenant name, the God of Israel. Hold up right here. He doesn't say, by my God. He says, the God of Israel. He's recognizing that Ruth has stepped over the line and accepted God as her God. He could almost have said, may the reward be given to you by the Lord your God. He's recognizing that transfer of loyalty to Israel and then Ruth's acceptance of the Lord as almost her patron God, her protector. Now, let's take a look at this last phrase right here, and I love this. Now, in Hebrew, the English is a lot longer than the Hebrew. This whole thing is basically just wings. But the idea is, this is a common image where they would use a mother bird, And the mother bird spreads her wings to protect her little baby birds from whatever's going on, be it foul weather, be it...
chickens do that?
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty...
really awesome.
It's pretty cool, right?
Because you can't even see the chicks.
No.
They just disappear on their wings.
Yep.
It's like, I saw it once and I was like,
What? This should have been a YouTube video. I should have pulled up a YouTube video.
it
Next
is
time.
amazing. It just, we had chickens and I saw this hen that had these chicks and a dog or something came, I forget what it was. And all of a sudden, she clucked or did something and they all ran and hid under her wings and you could not see them.
Mm-hmm.
You could not see those chicks.
Yep. And so the idea of that whole thing is that protection, that refuge. That's why the interpreters add the word refuge to help us who don't necessarily see the chickens every day, to help us understand the meaning of the image. It's that protection, that safe place. So he's asking, hey, Lord, will you repay her, give her a reward, and protect her? Let her find safety. Let her find refuge. And now, this is great. Last week, we saw Boaz giving Ruth some protection, giving her some security. This week, we're going to take an even closer look at seeing Boaz providing food for her, providing even more protection. What's Boaz functioning as right here? He's functioning as the wings. He's functioning as that refuge for Ruth. And it's just sort of interesting foreshadowing on the part of the author. Boaz is praying for the reward and for protection. He's already functioning as the protection. I wonder what'll come next. Don't even say it. We have no idea. We can't read ahead. No. Can't do it. Can't do it. But so this is really, again, the author's just leaning hard into this whole idea of the God's sovereignty at work and God's interacting in this story. We're going to, later on, tie in again how Naomi prayed for Ruth, and it'll be great. But, again, we see this whole thing that Boaz is really impressed by Ruth leaving all of that security, and he's praying, hey, may the Lord reestablish you in security and wholeness. And again, we're going to see that the Lord indeed does. But we're not there yet. Let's look at what Ruth says back to Boaz. So, verse 13. Then she said, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. So, again, we have the phrase found favor. It's no longer a question. It is now a statement. It's almost saying like, oh, you're too kind. But there's no like, no, it's a very serious, you are kind to me. I have found favor in your eyes. She says, my Lord. This phrase, even though we look at it and we're like, oh no, is she calling him God? It's not. I see Lisa shaking her head emphatically. No, it's not. It's just a phrase that's a term of respect. It does elevate a little bit. Jacob uses it with Esau a lot to try to like calm down. Oh my Lord, oh my Lord. This phrase is all throughout Scripture. It's not used in worship context. It's not used in reference to the Lord. It's just a term of respect. So it's just she's being correctly polite.
Was he the Lord of the field?
He
was the Lord of the field. He was over the field.
So he owned that portion of the field, but this particular phrase in Hebrew just means a term of respect. It's almost like if you were to say, hey, mister or sir. Yeah.
We do it in English. The English do it all the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's just polite, correctly polite. It's an honoring phrase. It's not just, hey, buddy. Right. But it does elevate him a little bit, which is appropriate. I love these next couple of verses. They're just perfect. So let's look at what Ruth highlights in her thanks to Boaz. What doesn't she say? She doesn't say, thank you so much for the food. She doesn't say, hey, it's really great that you're letting me glean in the field. She doesn't say, hey, that water was delightful. Thank you so much. She doesn't highlight any of that. Let's take a look at what she does say. First of all, for you have comforted me. This is emotional comfort, to console, to bring relief, to release of tensions. again, think about it. We've already pointed out. She is under a lot of stress. She's interacting with these Israelites. She's hoping she doesn't get beat up. She's trying super hard to get enough food for herself and for Naomi. She's working so hard. She doesn't think she has time to take a break. She's freaking out because the owner of the field just came over and who knows what he's going to do. Oh my gosh. And she's finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. And she's like, okay, you've comforted me, thank you. Whew. I was really concerned, but you've comforted me. Next, the phrase, you've spoken kindly. It really is just speaking compassionately and sympathetically. And I just think it's really interesting that her focus isn't on the tangible things that Boaz has done for her, but it's on how he's treated her and how he's made her feel. And I did think, I'm like, that's such a woman response, isn't it? Like, that's what I do. It's not like oh, thank you for this thing. It's like, oh, you made me feel great. It wasn't the thing itself. It's just you made me feel so happy. Thank you. But it is really cool that she is really appreciative of the comfort, the kindness that Boaz has shown. Again, Boaz is being intentionally being highlighted in these chapters here. Not to put a shadow on Ruth. Ruth is being highlighted too. Her hard work, her deference, her politeness, her graciousness with Naomi and with everybody she's interacting with. But Boaz is the star of this chapter. Boaz is the star of this chapter, as we'll take a look at in coming up verses. But before we move forward, let's take a look at her closing ideas here. Spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. Callie Minter in day 2 went into this a little bit. Actually, I think for a lot of that day, she talked about Ruth's humility here. The idea is of the word servant is basically a very low rung of female servant. And Ruth is saying, hey, I can't even attain to the level of your lowest rung of servants, yet you've elevated me to that. You've given me a place. And she's just like, I don't deserve it. I'm thankful. Thank you. Thank you, sir. So it's really cool. Ruth has indeed found favor, and she has recognized it here. Any questions? Moving forward. It's lunchtime. So we've moved forward, and presumably they've gone back to work at some time in the meantime. The phrasing doesn't make it sound like they went straight from this conversation to the meal. So presumably Ruth went back to work. It's great to see that she doesn't just accept a handout and then go home. You know, she was like, oh, thank you. And now I've got to work hard. She does not have a lazy spirit, for sure. Let's read verse 14. And at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here, eat some bread, dip your morsel in the wine. So she sat beside the reapers.
Wine vinegar, what's that?
We'll talk about it.
Okay.
So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her the roasted grain. And she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. We'll get to the wine in just a moment. It's a very interesting phrase. Very interesting. I'm just glaring at my mother because there was a little bit of a kerfuffle this morning. I'm not talking about consonants. I'm not. So, first of all, thinking about mealtimes in general in this culture, they were super, super significant. They were not like today where you can, do a drive-through and just sort of eat your McDonald's as you're driving to church. Meals in this culture meant something. A lot of things in this culture meant something. We have a very trivial culture. We tend not to value highly almost anything. But in this culture, meals were important. The fact in and of itself that Boaz is eating with his workers says a lot about Boaz, about his character and how a humble man that he is. The fact that he values his workers, that he's eating with them, that he's provided food for them. Boaz is a good guy. But let's take a look at what he says to Ruth. This is great. This is great. This is going to be the Mariah Fanning herself section. So first he says, come here. Presumably Ruth is keeping her distance, whether it's because, hey, she's a foreigner. Foreigners aren't supposed to, intermix with the Israelites, and she doesn't feel like she's welcome. Maybe she didn't bring a lunch because they didn't have any food, and so she's like, I don't want to be like, hey, also I don't have lunch. Can you feed me? Maybe. For whatever reason, she is not there, and so he invites her in. Come here. Then he says, eat some bread. This is, in fact, the bread that was prepared for his workers. Similarly with the water. It's not just, oh, there's some water. Yeah, you can have some too. But this is the food that they prepared for his workers. They're getting paid to do it. She's the freeloader, and he says, no, come and share in the bounty. This next phrase is interesting. So, dip your morsel in the wine. There's some debate about the word wine. Some big translations will say wine vinegar. Most likely, based on the research that I did, the wine is essentially a type of condiment that they would have used, a sort of spicy thing. My mom this morning thought I said continent. I did not. I said condiment. It's like ketchup. Dip your bread in the ketchup, y'all. Just do it.
Or the oil and spices like
Right.
in an
Yes.
Italian restaurant.
Yes, like an Italian restaurant. That's the thing that I was grasping for this entire time this morning. I named like 6 different condiments, and they're all like, that's disgusting. I'm like, I know, but there is something that you can use with bread that will make it taste good. There is, I just can't remember. Herbs. There you go. So it was going to be something that would spice up the bread, which would have been the staple of the Israelite diet. They ate mostly the bread. Mostly the bread, y'all. Which, I mean, I feel like I would have been okay with. I'm like, bread, maybe get some cheese in there, and, milk the goat, and you're like, oh, yeah. Now I got that bread, I got that cheese. But what's important about this is that it was something that you had only if you had some means. So this is Boaz's, all right, y'all? And Boaz is saying, look, I don't want you to have anything that we need to have the same thing. I don't want to have anything that you can't have. Come share what I have. Yeah. So, she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her the roasted grain. The language here in Hebrew is very specific. It's literally he handed her the roasted grain. He served her. Finally, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. What's unspoken in these 2 verses, these 2 lines here, is that Boaz continued to give her more and more. She didn't eat a little bit and say, okay, well, thank you very much. I'm going to go back to the field now. No. He said, no, take some more. No, take some more. No, I'm really full. No, take some more. He is so generous. He's just lavishing upon Ruth. These wings are spread wide, and it is exciting. So I'm telling you guys, you want to find me Boaz? Okay. All right. Now, we need to go over these last 2 verses because this is just like the cap, okay? This is the whipped cream on the apple pie. Let's read them through. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some from the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. There's so much here. I'm going to save my favorite part for last. So, first let's talk about these 2 paired phrases. Do not reproach her, do not rebuke her. Boaz has already talked to his young men and said, hey, you're not allowed to beat her up, you're not allowed to harass her physically in any way. It's clear from the context clues and from what Ruth says to Naomi, what Naomi says to Ruth, that the times were dangerous for young women. I'm sure that Boaz tried to find good dudes to work in his field, but, I mean, Ruth's a Moabite, and she should really count. So in this culture, he really wants to make sure that they know, hey, just because she's a freeloader, just because she's a Moabite, you're not allowed to touch her. But now he goes even further and says, you're not even allowed to verbally harass her in the slightest. Don't yell at her. If she does something that's completely off the wall, you're not allowed to say a word. Not one word. Zip it, lock it, throw the key away.
You should have said that about every woman that was working.
So I think for Ruth, in this culture, she would have been a special target. For his workers, there was probably some sort of, they're all Israelites, they're all sort of together, they're all paid, they're not freeloading. Ruth would have been a target. She had had a big bullseye painted on her back. And I think through what we've seen from Boaz is that if other people had been in danger, I feel like he would have stepped in for them as well. We don't know what other types of protections that he set up for his other servants. Our focus is, in fact, it is on Ruth. So that's a good point, though. We of course, would hope that his other women were treated well also. Let's see what he's telling his young men to do specifically. What are they letting Ruth do? Let her glean even among the sheaves. So sheaves, basically, whenever they gathered up all of the grain, they would sort of stack them up and bundle them all together. I did that this morning, too. It's fine. It's the gathering. It's the gathering of the sheaves. I think I did the exact same spot. So gathering the sheaves together, I'm going to back away from my podium here. And then they would leave them standing for a little bit, but then they would eventually cart them off, and they'd take them to the threshing floor, and they would thresh it out and separate it all out so that they would just have the grain then. But you weren't supposed to go into that area because that was the finished product. Leave it alone. But Boaz is saying, hey, if she goes over there, doesn't matter. Let her have it. It's fine. Just let her do it. Don't yell at her. And then this is guys. He is sabotaging his business operations here. Pull out some from the bundles for her that they've already harvested. He's like, take it out and throw it to the floor. Don't make her even have to work for it. Just let her pick it up. It's adorable. Guys, I need this in my life. Just let her pick it up off the ground. It's a beautiful thing. But seriously, this whole picture that we've seen is that Boaz is amazingly generous. He is kind. He is protective. And he is just like the knight in shining armor riding into the picture like, I'm the kinsman redeemer. Now, that's what we as the audience, of course, know. We know he's the kinsman redeemer because we read to the end of the story. We know. But just keep in mind that at this point, neither of the people who are involved, there's nothing romantic about what's going on here. You know, Boaz says, hey, my daughter. Ruth doesn't even know who he is. She doesn't know that he's even connected to her. She doesn't know. She doesn't know. All that she knows is that Boaz is indeed operating as God's wings and that she's finding refuge in this field. And we're going to get into further details later on. Naomi's going to be the one who's like, so that Boaz, he's a kinsman redeemer. So we're going to get into that later on. But that's been the picture that we've seen in all of this. So let's go ahead and just sort of summarize what this whole section boils down to here. Again, the center of the chiasm, this whole structure here, is on Boaz's response to Ruth, in which he prays for her and says, may the Lord repay you. May you find shelter under the Lord's wings. And this is the hinge around the whole rest of the chapter turns. And it's, again, just so cool that Boaz is, again, this is the great foreshadowing, that Boaz is going to be the one who fulfills this prayer. But we're not there yet. So this is our homework. Noelle, if you can go ahead and put that on our Facebook page, that'd be great. I'm going to leave this up, so you can do this at your convenience. Next week, we are going to finish up chapter 2. And we're going to take a look at how Ruth and Naomi are responding to this situation all together. But as we press forward, again, we are left with this great hope burgeoning in our souls that, Boaz, kinsman redeemer, awesomeness.